Okay, so I've got Dame Carol Black with me, and a lot of our listeners and watchers and people who follow this event, the water cooler event, will be familiar with your profile and your work, Carol. So it's great to be able to talk to you today about all things employment, workplace. And I guess we'll start perhaps why are you here today? What were you doing this morning on the stage?
I was doing two things this morning. The first thing, I had the pleasure of interviewing Eliza Philby, who's just published her, I think it's her second or third book. This one's called Inheritocracy, so she's invented a word. It's all about the interrelationship between the younger generation, if you like, and their parents. And it's based around the way, because of the way the world is at the moment, today's parents are often funding their children's mortgage.
Okay.
Getting them started in life.
Bank of mum and dad.
It's like it's the bank of mum and dad. More than before. I mean, of course, we would be used to the or to the, the wealthy, the aristocracy before, handing over wealth to their children and the very wealthy. But she's not talking about that level. These are people.
It's been pushed down.
Yes, who've been working all their lives, but working at a high level, earning a very good salary, being able to buy their own homes, and therefore accumulating more wealth than you might have thought possible, but then using it to support their children. But she was explaining that in the context of therefore leaving a divide between those children who have wealthier parents and those children who do not, and how that might also play out in the workplace, this difference.
Yeah, so this is about equality, but it's also about I guess the relationship that the people who benefit from this have with work.
Yes, and indeed the relationship with their parents.
Okay.
Which may be quite a different one, so you tend to stay longer close to your parents because they're going to be the ones who are going to enable you to make the next step in life. Whereas it would be fair to say, I think, a generation before, you would see your career as being that step. You were going to go to work, earn a good salary. That salary would enable you to buy a house, probably not today, etc., etc.
When there was mobility. So
yes, and the cost of living wasn't as great as today. So it's very interesting. And then she talked a lot about what, in her opinion, was the difference between the baby boomers, the millennials, the Gen Zs, etc. So it was... she had some really fascinating and interesting observations, but came down to the fact that it was human relations that mattered, and that relationship that we need to have in the workplace between the older worker with the maturity, the experience, supporting and mentoring and being around for the younger worker.
And had she done research in this? Was that where it came from?
Yeah, I mean, she is by training an academic. I'm not sure what her PhD was in, but she has researched and been interested in this area. I don't think she would describe herself as an academic now, but she absolutely knows how to use the academic methods.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I suppose. So what was the? I mean, I guess the context for this is the generations and generational. In the world of workplace wellbeing, I talk a lot about it's about expectations, isn't it? And the expectations are changing. But it's interesting. I haven't really thought of this as one of the reasons why younger generations' expectations of work would be changing.
It's interesting, and she went on to really say the young today think having several jobs is fine. I mean, they don't worry about changing jobs.
No.
They don't worry about the security of a job. She said she thought that relationships and having a much more better experience of life, not necessarily of work alone, but of life, was more important.
And is that being fueled by the fact they're receiving financial support from their parents then, or is that just that life has changed and people?
I think she saw that as life had changed, and even though the ones who are getting financial support are probably better off materially than children who don't have that advantage. I mean, she thought that younger people generally have a different expectation. They don't have deference, in jobs. I mean, it would be that you joined as a young person, you went up, and you were deferential to the person at the top.
Well, we mourned, certainly people from my generation and older, we mourned the loss of job for life for a long time, like it was a terrible loss. But no, it seems
the young
not,
wouldn't think that. They think it was a silly idea.
That would be like a life sentence of
They don't have that same fear about that, do they?
No, and it's interesting that when I was chatting to Peter Cheese earlier, we were talking about AI, and he was talking about the sort of what's interesting about it compared with other technologies that's been brought in is that it's bottom up, and its uses and the demand for it are being driven by just people wanting to get hold of it and do something with it, as opposed to email would have been top down. And actually this is a bit similar, because the demand from the younger generations is what's changing expectations of employers and what for well-being and for balance and all of those kind of things. And you must be seeing this in the work you do all the time, on the social and governmental front.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to me that all this is happening when we have the worst figures that we've ever had for young people's mental health. Many, many more young people either not going into work because of mental health reasons, or finding it very difficult to stay in work because of many mental health reasons. A visible increase, maybe it was there before but we didn't know it, in neurodiversity and the needs of people with neurodiverse conditions. I do not understand, I don't know that anybody does, why we have this constant and ever-going increase in anxiety, stress and depression in the young. I mean, we definitely do.
Yes, and that's, going back to that's not necessarily only the people who are supported financially by their parents. That's
across the board.
That's across the board. So that's to do with societal expectations. It's to do with education and support.
And I don't think we know why we are an outlier compared to other European countries. This is not a feature to the same extent in any other European country.
Yeah, and it's not set to get any better. Anyone I've got young kids, sort of 10 and 7, and anyone in that whose kids went through COVID at school, at primary school in particular. So one of mine was in reception when COVID happened. All of the conversations you have with schools and teachers and boards of governors now is that that is lurking there, and so that doesn't bode well, right, for changing this trajectory.
And it's, in a way, how do you support those children to be able to see that we all have mental health problems, and to be able to give them enough support and build their own resilience such that they can be in the workplace even with stress and anxiety, because we all go to work with stress and anxiety at times. This is not life is full of stress, so you're not going to have a stress-free existence.
No.
But how do we enable young people to understand this and to be comfortable with it?
This is this idea of a more sort of participative working culture, and everyone belongs.
Being able to discuss it with people at work without it being seen. I mean, if you think, we never used to discuss cancer, did we?
No.
That was that hidden horror over there, and if somebody had to leave work or was away from work because of cancer, somehow people quietly muttered, this was the big C.
Yes.
Now people go to work having chemotherapy, or are willing to say, I'm going off work because I'm having, you know, treatment for my breast cancer or whatever. We've become much more comfortable.
Yeah, and younger generations for sure. You know, they talk about resilience and well-being, sharing, and mental health in primary schools now, and all of that kind of thing. It's interesting though, because a lot of you know, my experience of it, but like I see with a lot of the anxiety comes from some of the, you know, talk about something like COVID, a lot of kids, an unprecedented number of kids are, you know, multiple years behind with you know, reading, writing, maths. But also they're not, they know that they are, you know, it's not that they're just sort of and carry, you know, they know that they're behind, and they know that they struggle with things that other people around don't struggle with. And I think that is a sort of lurking source of anxiety for a lot of kids. So it almost goes back to basic education. Now that's no one's fault, because, you know, well, you could say the way the pandemic was dealt with, I guess, but like that was a thing that happened, wasn't it? But it's about what
the way this country chose to deal with it, didn't it?
Yes.
And other countries did other things, and some preserved children going to school, or had managed more education than we did. Yes,
indeed, and then it's now our response to it has to be remedial, I guess, in that respect. So we're touching on some wide social issues. I'm interested in, so both you and I yesterday were at a session at Rand Europe with Charlie Mayfield, who's looking at his review for the government about economic inactivity, Keep Britain Working, I think it's called, isn't it? The review. I'm interested in sort of as somebody who a number of years ago now brought the Fitnote in, and you know, I'm sure there was a lot of the same sorts of challenges to get that to the table and then get it over the line, and then the implementation of that. I'm sure there were a lot of things that you went through to make that happen, and lessons that you learned. So your perspective on this, I guess, is particularly valuable. How are you sort of seeing this, you know, because all the things we've done, it's still, you know, that the economic activity figures are still going up. I think the government are interested, because they must be, because they're doing the review. They're interested in doing something about it. What's your read on this enterprise, as it were?
Well, I think it's very timely that we have a review, if you like, around this topic, because I think government, with the best will in the world, has found it very difficult to engage properly with employers. You know, they try, but they don't know any easy mechanism for doing this. So I think having Charlie to do this review is a good thing. I think when I did my review, the interesting thing was there was so little interest in health, work and well-being. It was like starting in the foothills, and employers weren't investing in it. No. You know,
it was an attendance management mindset.
Yeah, they didn't understand it. They didn't see the reasons for it. They couldn't see a return on investment. I think the good thing is that many employers, of course, starting particularly with the large ones, both private and public, and some medium-sized, not so much the little ones because it's difficult for them, have invested in different interventions for health, work and well-being. I think the big challenge now is they are disappointed because they don't see a return on their investment. So it's not the lack of interest now, which is what I found. There are lots of people know it's important, are interested, have put in interventions, but they don't seem to be doing what they wanted them to do.
Often that's because of how they're measuring and managing it, right? Well, as much as there are different...
Yeah, I think it's partly that they haven't used what I'll call the best evidence base, because a lot of interventions have gotten on. So, and we don't have a lot that have any, but we do have some. So choosing your intervention, making sure it's targeting the right people, ensure they know about it, because a lot of interventions, employees say, oh, I didn't know that was available in my firm, and then measuring it. So they don't do the whole thing, so then they don't know what works.
So it's kind of it's a bit productized.
And they have this fireworks thing, they're firing off all kinds, an app here, yoga here, mindfulness here. None of these things necessarily bad in themselves, not coordinated and not measured. And so I think one of the things I assume that Charlie's going to find is lots of activity, not that well coordinated and not giving a return on investment. Layered on top of that, the fact it does seem as if the country as a whole is not in as good a health generally as it was, say, 10 years ago. And therefore, you have got more health-related reasons for people to feel they can't go on working.
Aging workforce, aging population.
Exactly. And if you've then got poor workplace culture, because all the individual interventions you put in are personalised to the person. That's very different from have you got good managers? Does your leadership really care?
Culture,
the culture, have you got boards that are interested in? And that's difficult to do. So people tend to do the personalised, but don't measure them. And they never do the hard to do. So then we're disappointed.
Yeah, I'm smiling because of you have a friend. My working career has been with Kerry Cooper, a friend of yours, and running his business, which was all about integrated strategic approaches. And we were often the people that they came to when they tried all that other stuff and couldn't make the sums add up. So it was about data-driven approaches, evidence-based, actionable insights, that sort of level, but making sure that it was all of the different ingredients and that leaders had the right behaviours and skills. That leaders need development around this stuff as well, don't they?
And particularly line managers. They need lots of support and how to have the right conversations. I mean, if somebody does have the courage to say to their line manager, look, I'm struggling, I've got real problems and I'm a bit depressed. Well, you don't want someone who's going to throw up their hands in horror and say, what am I going to do?
Yes.
You want someone who can say, right, well, let's have a talk about it and then I will get you help in an appropriate way, because I'm not the person who necessarily can help you, but I can make the help happen.
It's a bit more, it's like a bit more than signposting, because it needs the empathy, but it's not treatment.
No, it's the empathy and saying, I understand you've got a problem, I can empathise with it, and I do know how to find you some help. And that is not always easy to do.
Yes, and it's also, I think it's also that supported by, because how do you find out about this stuff as a manager as well? There's a culture of wellbeing conversations that's required there. So it's, I don't think, as you kind of alluded to, I don't think most managers feel like they have the confidence and capability to host not just wellbeing conversations one-on-one, but also generally, are they checking in, making it the norm to talk about health and wellbeing, sort of, things factors that are in the management standards, for example, like control or work relationships or overload, making that just, and I think helping them to have that background skill of being able to have conversations is as important as then being able to signpost.
Sure. And so that requires time and work.
Yes.
Maybe not a lot of money, but certainly time.
Yeah, and perhaps connection to some of the data that the organisation is collecting around this stuff, so that it's not just an isolated.
I thought it was interesting yesterday in the meeting we were both at, where the gentleman from the local NHS trust said that what they did was, when they got back their part of the national survey of health and wellbeing, they broke it down into each department and each manager, and they gave them their bit of data. And what he said was, some of the managers just threw up their hands in horror and said, well, how am I going to deal with this? I now see I've got a lot of stressed workers. What am I going to do? So it really is getting the information back to the right people, but then helping them act on it.
100%. I know. Funnily enough, that's one of the things I did with Carey, was not only giving each team its data, but also giving the manager or the leader a readout using a psychometric on how they were actually creating those outcomes. So if the team was reporting not having enough autonomy, for example, are you the kind of leader who gives autonomy? And so actually, rather than throwing your hands up and saying how I go, you need to, it's about owning. You probably caused some of this stuff, you know.
You probably did.
Yeah. So no, it is interesting. So I'm just thinking about, so what do you think in terms of going back to the review? What does good look like for an outcome from this review? Because I think is it reporting in the summer, and then it's about where action flows from there. What's the sort of best case for you as someone who's been there?
I think a very good case would be that if Charlie has managed to get enough talking time to real employers and real people on the ground, that he can get a sense of where they are now and what can be done with the resources they already spend, you know, to make them, to utilize them better, and so that you can get a better implementation and measurement with the resources that we've got. I think it would be good, although I suspect the government is not in a place that's going to make this easy, if they can think of some incentivisation, particularly for certain sizes of employers. I think it's hard to recommend things that require more burden on the employer
at the moment.
That is tough, but can we make it a much better thing for the employer, such they will get results from what they're doing? I hope that Charlie will have had a good look at systems abroad, which I'm sure he is doing.
I think so.
To see
Netherlands and Denmark, we weren't.
What are they doing in the early phase of keeping people in work and return to work that we could learn from? We probably can't certainly do the same thing, but where are the lessons? You know, where are the lessons? What is the appropriate use of the insurance industry? I hope, but he may not, looks at statutory sick pay, which is far too low and drives people into our benefit system. That needs a slow but determined reform. And I hope he'll have something to say about this crucial importance of stopping people leaving the workplace, that you do everything. Once their sick pay has ended, is there something that government and employers can do together? Because if you think about it, once sick pay has ended, the employer really slips away at the moment.
Yes. And I think that's where there are, if I'm from reading what I heard yesterday rightly, there are some quite different systems in other countries for dealing with that.
So, you know, could you devise, without it being too expensive, a system whereby you have a few more months of real rehabilitation and social and as caseworker support? Because I think it's how do you stop that person entering that benefit system, keep them close to the labour market, but you can't put all the burden on the employer.
No, and it's recognising, though, it's making the case that some of that spend early on is going to be less than the spend that it will cost you once they're lost.
Once they're lost, you not only have all they will try to get a health-related benefit. It pays you more than anything else. People will naturally try going for PIP. And because they're sedentary and possibly, you know, not feeling good about that, they'll probably use the health system more. So you know, you've got multiple costs, and they're not contributing anything. And what's more, the quality of their lives is probably pretty miserable.
Yeah. And so if the burden can't go to the employer, it can either go to the government or the employee, right?
Yeah. Well, I think you would like to see it, I think, shared. And at the moment, and there's a very good diagram in Charlie's current discoveries, where he shows at which stages the employer puts in most, which stage the government.
Okay.
And you can see that the employer is putting it all in when the person's in work.
Okay.
The government puts it all in when they're out of work. My belief is it needs to be more evenly spread, so this is a shared endeavour, and you might want to bring in the insurance industry to help you.
Yes, and that's about, I suppose that's an interesting angle, because that's kind of one way or another you're creating marketplaces there, which then everyone kind of leans into, and that's another source of funding for this stuff.
And I don't think we should look for short, quick wins, because we've been trying to do short, quick wins for years. And usually they're not done well, then they fail, but it may never have been the idea.
Yes.
It may have been the implementation. So I'd love to see the DWP create a proper overarching strategy that takes us from being in work to being in our inactive part of the benefit system, with interventions at each stage.
Look at the full cycle.
Look at the full cycle, and then see how do you fairly distribute responsibility, and what are your checks and balances. Because in countries like the Netherlands, although there's a lot of support early on, there are some pretty heavy challenges if you don't, and sanctions.
Yes.
If you
So it has
don't,
teeth.
Oh, it's got teeth. It's got teeth.
Yeah.
But it's very supportive.
Yeah.
And
That's
that has
brilliant.
taken them, I think, about 15 years to develop, so that there's been nothing quick.
Yeah.
So I'm not looking for quick wins. I would like to see fairly quickly the employer helped with what they're already doing to maximise its effect, so they can feel they get a better return on them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because sometimes it's put down to the fact that, you know, cultures like Denmark and the Netherlands are different to ours, so they would get it right, wouldn't they? But actually, you know, that's a bit reductionist, because you know, 15 years of investment. That's a good chunk of.
In fact, we weren't in this place ourselves 20 years ago. You know, if you look back to 2002-3, we were much better than we are now.
Yes.
And we had more disabled people in work. We had far less economic inactivity.
So I suppose, to end on an optimistic note, it could be different. It has been different. It could be different.
It could be different. And it's not rocket science. And, you know, there are lots of us that say good examples around the world to draw on, not to borrow entirely, but to look at the mechanisms.
Yes.
And what we didn't have 20 years ago were a lot of engaged employers.
Yes.
We've got that.
More educated roles inside where people own health.
It's just that, you know, I don't think they're making the best use of what they invest.
Yes. I would agree with that. Carol, thank you very much. Our time is up. I've really enjoyed that, and I thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. This episode is brought to you by WellHub, the corporate wellness platform transforming how companies care for their teams with a single subscription. Get an exclusive free trial using the link in the description below.